Yep, there we are.
So I am live now. Hi, folks. I thought we were live for a few minutes. So now instead of seeing the promo and having the music and everything, you're seeing us. Okay. So that will suffice. I'm going to go through the introductions again. Welcome. I'm Joe Firestone. This is the MMT and the Public Purpose Show. I'm one of your hosts. Your other host is Lisa Theobald. And our guest for tonight is Matthew Waldy, our great friend and longtime scholar, okay, of MMT. And to repeat myself, we'll be discussing fiscal myths and fiscal truths tonight. And the reason why we're discussing them is so much of Washington, D.C. still adheres to fiscal myths. And every once in a while, we have to go through the myths and the corresponding truths to refresh everybody's memory about what's going on. Just keep on hammering the truths as we see it from the viewpoint of the MMT lens on home. So the way we're going to begin this is I'm going to share a document of mine, an excerpt from my book, Fiscal Myths, the 2016 campaign. And I'll read the fiscal myths and the fiscal truths from there. And then I will turn Lisa and Matt loose to fill in all the various points that I don't make in these rather short statements. So let me share the screen here. Your cat is very beautiful, Lisa.
Thank you. She's also very mischievous, and her sister is even worse.
Uh, why is it showing only my Chrome tab? Why doesn't it show my... Oh, here it is. There's the excerpt. Let me make sure it has gotten into the stream. Not quite there yet, I see. Okay.
There we
There
go.
we go. I think now we are all there. So let me go back to this. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble. Oh, I know. I'm used to doing it on screen. And okay, I got it wrong. Okay, I'm getting an echo from somewhere.
No, it's my phone, Joe. You're good.
Okay. So, the first category of myths and truths is myths and truths about running out of money, quote unquote. And the first myth is the government can run out of money. And the truth is, a fiat sovereign government cannot be forced to run out of money. It can only decide to run out of money. In other words, it can voluntarily refuse to appropriate the spending and run out of money in that way. But specifically in the case of the United States, running out of money to pay one's bills will violate the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, since the U.S. government is prohibited from defaulting uh, under the 14th Amendment. I believe it's Section 4. And here's another truth concerning whether the government is able to run out of money. Specifically, a fiat sovereign government can create whatever amount of money it needs or wants to buy any goods and services available for sale, or pay any debts due and payable in its own national currency. Okay, Matt and Lisa, please feel free to comment on that first myth and first two truths.
Well, I can start. There's something missing in there that is constantly attributed to MMT that isn't really in our description. It doesn't say that we have to spend or that we should spend or that the answer to everything is more spending. Those are things that we talk about a lot because that's a lot of the current economic status we're in will relieve those problems. But that doesn't mean we advocate for it just as spending as much as possible. So so there are a lot of people now who actually understand this more. And I will give, 5 years ago there was many who did not. They really, but there are a growing amount of people who understand that taxes, looking around, do not pay for everything. They still don't quite understand where taxes go because they really feel like it has to go somewhere. Or some that are a little bit more wise try to say, well, it's in the balance sheet, so they just respend it, which is not true either. It can be said that way, but that is not a framing that MMT uses. So all money is in this case. We're not fiscally constrained by taxes. Is the better way of I think.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because we went round and round on that last year before, I think it was, when we were talking about funding state-based healthcare.
Oh yes.
It is
round and round about that.
And I think it's really important because in your states, even in your states, the states get federal funding, and then they make up shortfalls, or they have their own legislation and their own programs that they have to fund, and that comes from your state, your federal funding, and then there are taxes that can happen. They can do all kinds of things, just like the federal government can do, to raise funds to fund the state programs and whatnot, and take in that federal money. But a state cannot print its own money, right? So, and that is very similar to a household, right? You've got to have an income, right? If you've got to get money from, just think of it this way. The state tax pool of money that comes in and the federal government money that is allocated to the states, it's just like getting a paycheck, and when you run out of that money, you run out of that money. That is a household budget. But the federal government does not work that way. Right?
The federal government does not work that way, yes.
So if the federal government, with the help of Congress, deems that they are going to fund a program and the resources are there, then the money comes and it is done.
Well, and he just pointed out that per the Constitution, if there's a shortfall, the federal government has to help.
Right. Exactly.
Or be
exactly.
So that
yes, it's mandated by the Constitution to help.
Exactly, because we cannot default. We have to be able to meet our debts and our obligations, and that is the benefit of being a sovereign with a fiat currency. It's also part of the reason why countries that aren't fiat sovereign and fiat, they might be a sovereign, but they're not on their own fiat currency, can find themselves in really sticky situations because they are not in control of being able to control what they are going to fund, what they are not going to fund. They are not capable of printing money per se. I hate to even say that, printing money, because that's not,
it's
not
okay.
how it works. It's not how it works.
I know we don't print money, but that's okay.
Right? So I think it's important for people to get their arms around this idea, and this dovetails into it, okay? Because we're gonna blow out of the water some myths that are already starting to grind my teeth.
Yep.
Because we're in campaign season, and here it comes, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the funnest one is I can name a non-sovereign country, and it blows people's minds when I say this. France, Germany,
Mm-hmm.
Sweden,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
but not England. England is a sovereign country. Australia is
It
a
is.
monetary sovereign country. Japan is a monetarily sovereign country, but not Luxembourg or Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
In Sweden's case, Matt,
Uh,
have they gone to the euro yet? Because for years
well,
they hadn't gone to it. Now they're obligated by treaty to go to it, but they've
there
been
you go.
stalling.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still, but they
Stalling.
are obligated by treaty, and they are also obligated to pay taxes to the EU and have a representative. So, in that respect, they are. But you're right. That's the same thing England did for many years
Right, it
before
is.
Brexit.
Okay, and England, of course, still can do it because they've withdrawn from the eurozone now.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah, and I consider that a basic sovereignty issue, a basic country sovereignty issue. I know that there are other people who would use a political version of the term sovereignty, but I don't think that you're necessarily sovereign if you owe taxes to an entity that you don't have elected officials.
Yes, I consider it a basic requirement of sovereignty too, that you be a monetary sovereign.
Yeah, yes, because if you are not a monetary sovereign, you really are at the mercy of someone else.
Right, of those whose money you are using.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the second myth. The government can only raise money to spend by taxing or borrowing. And
I love that.
the truth, the government can and does create money when it spends. Now, of course, we're talking about a monetarily sovereign government here. And minimally, the myth ought to read, quote, the government can only raise money to spend by taxing, borrowing, or creating it. That makes solvency questions not very scary at all, but only if office holders are willing to use the power to create money for spending or repaying debt. Now, here in the United States, okay, our office holders uh, um, do use that power to create money for spending or repaying debt, because that's what happens when we deficit spend. Okay, folks, what's your view on this myth and truth?
Uh,
I
I actually, I go ahead. You can go, please. I have my
I was just going to say that this one is even worse than the first one. People don't understand this even more so, right? Because
yeah.
it's well, it's not something that people touch on as frequently as all the other things that we touch on, and not go into it in a level that like people can actually get their arms around. And let's just be honest here. This is a this is a tough one. You know, finance, debits and credits, balance sheet, all of that, but then monetary theory, and you can hear it from the top down. But I'm one of those people that, I got to do my own proof, right? And I have the ability to do that because, well, I worked in the industry for a long time. So this one is, I think, even harder. People constantly think that every program in the federal government is paid for by your taxes, and that every individual that works in the government is getting paid by your tax dollars, right? It's frustrating that people still talk like that and still think that way, And it is even more frustrating when our politicians who already know better use that language because all it does is perpetuate these myths. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Sure, you're right. This is definitely one of those myths that most people don't really understand and have a hard time grasping because of the term debt. In my experience, because truthfully, and I posted this recently, you really cannot prove we borrow our own currency.
Yeah, that's another one that I don't like to venture into that water very often, but since we're all three here, that might be a good discussion to speak on.
It's really just if we create dollars and then when we spend them and to satisfy a debt owed in dollars, you're not really borrowing your own currency. You're just spending. It's just saying that I have $10 in a bond in a U.S. bond that gets 5% interest. Well, I'm going to really that means that my money is no longer that $10. It's $10 plus 5%. So it just because that money comes from the same place you got the money originally is really convoluted and actually one of I think the ways that I was able to grasp how badly we're being taught about monetary processes because there's no way that if it's my bank account and I put $10 in my bank account and I make another $5 and I put $5 more, that's still my money. I just put $15 in that account. I didn't borrow $5 to put $10 to make it 15. That makes no sense, right? But if you put it in that way, if you put it as that debt is being borrowed, that means it's something that has to be handled later on. That it's a problem that we can't deal with. That if we're all this money that's going out, and when we could just say, well, that money you're putting in there is going to worth this amount of dollars, and just leave it at that, not call it debt, because it isn't really debt. And there's plenty of countries that have done this before. Japan relieved all their debt a few times, and they all it is saying that $1 trillion, and then everybody screams, or $15 trillion, and they're going to owe interest on it. That's going to bankrupt us. But the truth is all those dollars are only worth either in exchange for goods and services the available to buy in U.S. dollars. So it's just going to go back into the economy. There's no way of spending that amount of money, so they just keep it in these accounts accruing interest. We could just say you're no longer accruing interest, turn them into regular bank accounts. There's just it is after we turn from the gold standard, it is no longer a necessary function.
Right.
Absolutely, Matt. Absolutely. We can also note here that when we, other than by taxing, okay, and borrowing, well, first of all, we should make it clear that the federal government, okay, always creates money when it spends.
Hmm.
So the money being spent is not our tax money, okay, in the first place. It's not the money that we received from selling bonds or securities, which in other terms, of course, are called debt instruments. And Matt thinks we ought to change the terminology of that because it's not like our debt. It's a
Right.
completely different thing.
Hmm.
But the basic point is that the Federal Reserve is always creating money which goes into the Treasury spending account that the Treasury can use to spend. Okay. Now, what the taxing and selling of debt instruments actually does is it drains money. It drains money from the economy
Hmm.
and puts it on ice in some
Yep.
way. Okay,
Parks it.
parks it for use at a future time. But uh, we have the confusion that we think that it's that money that's getting spent, so we don't recognize that the federal government in the United States is creating money constantly.
Hmm.
But there are other ways of creating money than simply spending. In other words, you can create money which technically is not money because it's not in the economy, but you can create reserves for the Treasury spending account before those reserves are spent. In other words, before the actual money is created through the spending, you can create reserves that are placed in the Treasury spending account. There are multiple ways of doing that, two of which I'm going to mention now. The first is that you can create platinum coins. Okay, the power to do that is granted to the Secretary of the Treasury by the coin law of 1995. The Secretary of the Treasury has the authority, according to that coin law, to specify the face value of a platinum coin, okay, of 1 ounce. That face value can be very low. It can be $50. It can be $100. It can be anything the Secretary of the Treasury wants it to be. The Secretary of Treasury can then simply order the mint to create a coin with that face value that the Secretary wants to authorize. In the extreme, if the Secretary of the Treasury wants to mint a coin that has $100 trillion face value, she or he can do that. And then that coin would be deposited at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve would turn it into reserves that would eventually get to the Treasury spending account and would be parked there. And as I said, that would not be part of the money supply yet because it had not been spent into the economy. But if it were parked there, it represents the capability of the Treasury Department to spend at some time in the future that amount of money. So that's one way of creating reserves to spend. The other way of creating reserves to spend is for the Congress simply to order the Federal Reserve to create the amount specified in an appropriation. This is a very simple way of doing things. Some of my research has been focused on this. I've called it overt congressional financing. It has not been used by Congress yet, but it certainly can be used by Congress, and its effect would be to park the dollars that were appropriated by Congress in the Treasury spending account for use when the time comes to spend those dollars. So those are just two ways of creating reserves that are denominated in dollars in the Treasury spending account.
That would rectify the so-called deficit or debt problem, not deficit, the debt problem. So that you could say we're no longer in debt because we have these instruments in place. Not the overt, but the $1 trillion coin could be used in situations where somebody is vehement about believing that the debt is a problem, and we could relieve all that debt by minting this coin or minting these coins.
Right, but of course, you would not relieve
Yeah.
the debt, quote unquote,
Right, until it's
at
done.
once,
Yep.
because to place it all into the economy too fast would be highly inflationary. But if you
if
place
if
it
it was
in,
sent out in cash. If they were to spend it though, if it's just sitting in an account, it won't cause inflation.
it won't cause inflation.
So that,
So
I'm just saying, as far
when
as the
it
leaving
has
account,
to be spent is when the financial instrument, the bond, okay, or the security issued by the Treasury falls due.
Right.
That's when that money would be used.
yep.
Okay, it would
Uh,
pay principal that was owed. It would pay the interest, okay, that was owed.
and so that's the reason why they're discussing it right now to start up our own crypto type currency for the United States, switching over an electronic blockchain technology. They were That's what the talk was, right? To use that $1 trillion coin to start off that way of just money distribution, which is direct, by the way. It's no longer going through the private banking system, which is, it is pretty much setting up a separate way of distributing dollars.
Yes, that's right, and I believe that's from a proposal, okay, of Rowan Gray's.
Yes, it is.
If
The
I
other thing I wanted to bring up just real quick is the reason why we don't change this system or get rid of the debt in this way, or to even have the discussion, is because the bond market, in a lot of respects, since it's actually mostly domestically owned debt, it is
Mhm.
used by very wealthy people as essentially socialism for the rich. That they never have to move their money, and they can never go broke. So it is a guarantee. Once you get to a certain level of, and it isn't a super duper high, it's strange enough, but it only needs to get to a certain level of income to be able to always generate a generational wealth for in perpetual, forever. And they don't want to get rid of that.
That's right, and basically, also they want someplace to park their money
Yes.
where
Yep.
the repayment is guaranteed. In this case, okay, it's guaranteed by the Constitution, and where it will gather some interests. And of course, the safest thing you can do with your money and get some interest for it is to buy treasury bonds because the Constitution guarantees the money will be repaid. Okay.
But that's how I look at it, though, as a rich person's socialism. It can be done for everybody, but it's a very much, that's how I look at it.
That's how I look at it too. It's welfare for the rich.
Yep.
And it's welfare we can certainly afford to end at some point.
Yep.
Okay, let's get on to myth number 3.
Wait. Can we just hold on 1 second?
Of
What
course.
would you want to call? What would you want to rename it? If the government isn't borrowing and issuing debt, what would you want to
Yeah.
do?
It's just a federal bank account.
I see. So you get rid of the gold standard.
Interest payments. Yep. Get rid of the
Yep.
interest payments.
That's what's wrong. We never got off of the gold standard talk about all of this stuff.
Yeah, we never got out of the gold standard talk, but I think what you could call it, instead of calling it a debt instrument or calling it a debt, we could call it a certificate of deposit because that's
Yeah.
what it is.
That's what it is. Yeah.
It's an analogous to a certificate of deposit, except it's better than a certificate of deposit because the bank could fail and you could lose your certificate of a deposit, but the government cannot fail and is constrained by the Constitution to guarantee that your CD will be repaid.
Yes, and and this is really off topic, but this is the reason why I constantly bring up the necessity for the discussion on reparations, because this is how generational wealth is maintained throughout. So either we all get it, or none of us get it. Because it is our treasury. Instead of calling it our taxes, call it our treasury.
Our treasury. What? Yes. I mean that we have to flip. We have to flip it around. I mean, It is so heinous that we say that the government is borrowing, they're borrowing money, right? They
Uh,
don't. We pay our debts in U.S. dollars. We settle all our debts in U.S. dollars. So who the hell are we borrowing dollars from? We
Yes,
create them.
we do create them. That's right. Okay, the third myth: we need to cut government spending and make do with no more money.
Oh,
And the truth is, we may need to cut government spending or raise taxes to maintain or create price stability, but only if we have full employment and inflation has begun. Otherwise, we need to get to full employment and achieve other goals consistent with the public purpose. So,
yeah,
folks, would you like to comment on that?
well, that's a when you understand that all money is created and spent into existence, this becomes one of those. Oh, okay, yeah, I see that now. The whole point of money isn't to make somebody a small group of people wealthy and control everything. The whole point is that it's the citizens' treasury. So we need to have access to that treasury, and the way we have access to that treasury while being productive is by promoting full employment.
Not simply for employment, but other public purpose goals.
Yes, but I would put them in different. Like but full employment is the litmus. That's when and that's the other when we talk about that spending is not what MMT describes as the norm all the time. I mean, Minsky was very clear about this. All the people that led up to this were very clear. There's a point when spending is not a good idea.
right.
Yes, yes.
And it has to not only be curtailed, but there has to be taxes being pulled. But those taxes don't get pulled from poor people. They don't get pulled from middle class. They don't get pulled from people who are pulling their, essentially pulling away. There's always, that's why you have these classes. You pull from the people who can afford it first.
Yes.
And we are doing the exact opposite.
Yes. We are doing the exact opposite because we have a bad government that does not perform well.
Yeah.
It's causing inflation. It's
Yes, it is.
we are literally every time they raise interest rates, they are causing inflation. They think that they're slowing down and creating recession, which they should, but not in our current economic status right now. We can't really produce that until a lot of other things start to come down, right? The property prices, other things that are floating up high. So every time they're increasing a rate at the Fed, that is increasing the cost of everything because we
Mm-hmm.
mostly spend money as a debt instrument. We mostly spend in debt. So we take out our credit card to buy things. We so even our bank notes, the businesses that give us our pay, they borrowed that money from a bank. the,
Mm-hmm.
that we're and so we are literally every time somebody has to pay a little bit more in interest, that increases prices across the board, which increases inflation.
Yes, that's very true. Let's move on to myth number 3. It's very simple. It says our government spends more than it takes in, and then it says that is not sustainable. And the corresponding truth is our government is a fiat sovereign government that create money at will. So it can always create as much money as it needs, even when it spends more than it takes in. It is not fiscal sustainability that ought to constrain government spending, but inflation and the resulting issue of political sustainability. So, how would you comment on that and add to that, since obviously that statement, while true, is also incomplete?
Well, I would say that that money volume does not create inflation. right? So the more money that is spent does not mean that that itself causes inflation. It's always so you can, it isn't that you can't spend more money. You can't spend more money if there is a resource restriction. So if there's
Right.
some
So
kind of
you,
overall resource restriction, you cannot spend money. You can't. So in other words, what was it? I had put it, the dollar. Okay, so if you can't buy something with a dollar that makes more of it, then you will cause inflation, right? So if a dollar doesn't create a job, that was it. If the dollar doesn't create a job, it becomes inflationary. That was another way of. There's a whole bunch of ways of putting this.
Well, yeah, because
Find that
yes,
bumper sticker.
right, right, and but I'm curious about this resulting issue of political sustainability.
okay, because uh, I mean, when you have inflation that is serious inflation,
Mm-hmm.
when it's runaway inflation, as in the Weimar Germany situation,
Hyper, yeah, hyperinflation.
it begins to threaten the legitimacy of the government. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe they shouldn't be misconstruing this whole monetary system in its presentation in the first place.
So yeah,
When the
that's
spin
the issue.
catches up with them,
That's
right?
the issue because they were dealing with a money backed with a precious metal. When we changed over, it did change a little bit, a lot. That we did not reflect in how we explained how money works, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and that was taken advantage of, in my estimation, by a group called the Monetarists, where they kind
Mm-hmm.
of knew because it was in this. I mean, it wasn't like it was really, they could see the result was creating more income inequality, meaning that supply side was getting a far larger amount and could be misconstrued as being more important than demand. And when they did that, they were able to
Exactly what
make
happened.
people more important and necessary for the economy. Uh, they're not. They are a they should be a controlled class. They shouldn't be. They should be more control. We control our poor people. We should be controlling our wealthy.
Well, yeah, yeah. And what we have done in the past 10 years is just like cut all the tethers of any type of even, they don't even have any guardrails on anymore,
Well, and
right?
yeah, it just matters on resource restrictions. The calculation of like Weimar was because they had to pay back an exorbitant debt from World War I in somebody else's denomination, somebody else's money. So because
Mm-hmm.
they didn't produce the francs or the pounds that they needed to pay back, so they could only do that by selling trading their good and exchanging their goods and resources. So that required more and more people to work, for less and less in order to pay that back. It just became Zimbabwe is another one they bring up all the time, where that was where they kicked out all the white farmers, rightfully so, but they didn't have any experts to tell them how to farm anymore, so they had to import all their food. And again, that was a resource restriction that you're going to have to go and pay another country's money, the money you don't control and create, causing that money to lose its value. And because traders don't necessarily want, Zimbabwe money for all the time. They want other things, and you can't produce those things. They say, "Oh, I don't want to sell you my rutabagas or my or my farm equipment or any of that stuff." So then they're stuck getting poorer and poorer, while their money, what they're trying to do is print more money. That's a terrible way to put it, but create more money so that people don't realize that they are now spending $10,000 for bread that they used to spend literally $5 on 6 months prior.
So, speaking in terms of the current international situation, what we were trying to do to the Russians was by imposing
Yeah.
the sanctions, we were trying to drive up the price of things in Russia, the price of basics in Russia. And we calculated, or our foreign policy people calculated, that that was going to cause inflation, okay, in Russia. And as a result of the inflation or the shortages of goods, that was going to undermine, okay, the legitimacy of Putin's regime in Russia and result in the overthrow of Putin and hopefully the breakup of the Russian Federation, such that there would be no Russia as we know it anymore, and it would no longer be a great power. That was basically the logic of our foreign policy people.
And what happened was that that a resource that was necessary for the EU to survive, gas, was slowly shut off from Russia, causing is so now and so first it became a thing where they said they weren't going to pay them in Russian rubles anymore. So instead of shutting off the gas there, which I'm shocked that he didn't, because that pretty much voids the contract they have, he set up a whole entire separate company that would take whatever they gave them and turn it into rubles for the Russian gas companies. And you know where they got that? They got that from BRICS. So the Chinese relationship with Russia allowed them to be able to use that system and not cut off their gas. So in some respects, they were being better stewards of the international economy than those who were trying to overthrow Russia with economic sanctions. And because we know that Western states don't change their mind, right? Because it's admitting failure is the number
not an option
sin in the whole wide world. We're stuck now trying to figure out how the EU is going to survive, and I guess it's going to be electric heating with and the possible reigniting of coal stations that have been shut down, electric coal production, and possibly, I don't want to say for sure, maybe they'll reignite a couple of the old nuclear facilities that they've been shutting down. But the problem is that still only covers about 60 to 65% of households, and so it doesn't matter in that respect.
The other point here, okay, is that since the inflation is far worse in Europe than in Russia, we now have a situation that that inflation is creating a political sustainability problem for the regimes, okay, of Europe.
and it hasn't even gotten bad yet.
And it hasn't even gotten bad yet. Yeah, this winter, it's calculated that all kinds of people are going to be in the streets constantly until the governments that have created this situation actually resign. And we're likely a lot of that in 2 or 3 months.
I'm pretty flabbergasted that all of Europe is going to allow itself to fall into this situation without any real united front pushback against this, because it is ridiculous that they're in this situation.
It's literally the fact that they don't have a working democracies anymore.
Correct.
The same reason we have a problem. They can't actually affect change. They can affect change in their country. They can bitch and moan from their country. They can have their people go and tell the EU to do this, that, and other thing. But they're really, really stuck on whatever the EU decides. On top of the fact that the reason why this didn't work with Russia was because Russia is a vast country. It's not a small country. They don't have the population, even the United States has about 150, 160,000 million people, excuse me. But the problem is that their production capacity is just completely superseded or overproduced what the West ever thought they could do. They literally took over chains of stores that were Western stores and didn't stop production in some of them. There was only a few things that were completely taken out and weren't replaced by some kind of homegrown internal production or with trade with China.
Yes.
Yeah, and they have so many natural resources, right? They got
Yeah,
their resources, they got their infrastructure for their resources, they got the labor, they have the culture, you know what I mean? Like they're good to go on this, and they're
they
in
are.
growth mode, right?
Well, and that's why they say, yeah, they're in growth mode, and that's the reason why really Putin stared at this whole scenario that was going on, trying to figure out for 8 years, trying to figure out what they were trying to do while he set up everything for this. I mean, really, he did. Well, now in January, I guess there was a release from the Rand Corporation that is pretty much dictating everything that is happening right now as a way of devaluing the euro, so that property drops, and that all these industries and businesses can be bought up, and there can be a large conglomerization of the European Union into more of a corporate fascist, overt fascist style. We know it. It's called a Great Reset. That's the name for it.
That's the name.
But we never knew that there was an actual Rand corporate plan that was on President Biden's desk and in his community of his ear, and it is almost dictating directly down. Yeah, it's getting weird. I mean, and I may lean toward listening to these things, but when it's written out, it's hard to deny that this was not some kind of plan. I mean, and I don't really know what to think of it. It's sort of so anti-human that
Yes, that's what it is.
it boggles my mind that they found it to be so necessary that they needed to control this amount in order for them to feel comfortable with us switching over to save the planet, because that's what the reason supposedly is so that we can save the planet the right way.
That's just a big ass.
It's the control. It's capitalism and control is what it is. But that's that's how they're selling it, right? Is these countries are going to go socialist if we don't figure this out, and we all know that's going to lead to horrible things and people being thrown in jail for speaking their mind and all these, but yet all the things that they're saying are what's happening, not against socialism. So anyway, it's a little bit of tangent, but it goes along with that particular myth. It's they use it. It's not. They know it's not true.
Yeah, and along with that, functional democracy or dysfunctional democracies all over the place, right? I mean, anytime they get any stabilization with a functional democracy in past history, right? What do? They go in and they make damn sure that they wreck it, right?
Well, and it's also a problem with representational republics. This is always that's why they keep them republics. That's why they keep them republics instead of going into a direct democracy. Even though direct democracy is very dirty and messy, it is actually the only humanist way of collectively governing, in my opinion, in a short term.
Well, yes, I agree with you on that totally, because what I am seeing now on a you see it on a global scale, you see it in the national scale, you see it on the state scale. Now I'm seeing it on the school board scale, right?
Oh yeah, it's gone all the way down.
Oh, and I'll tell you what, we're in this situation right now where we're being held hostage on the school board, incapable of doing what is absolutely necessary to keep the community whole. We had a horrific incident that went national. My school district, woohoo, okay?
Mm.
And it literally came down to, what are you going to do about the fact that we have to overhaul this diversity, equity, and inclusion, because now we have an issue, a big one, and we've been talking about and trying to get this done for 2 years because the, and I'm going to get really specific here, the culture in this country from 7 years ago until now it's night and day, right? Our community culture, our political culture, the corporate culture, it is not the same dynamics as we had even in 2015. Like, I long for the opportunity with this knowledge that we've got today. And I think everybody else would love to go back to 2015 and, okay, we really needed to fight for that. We just didn't know how bad it could possibly get, right?
Yes,
But
now we know.
we are in
Yeah,
a situation right now where we have elected officials. We can't get rid of them.
No.
Unless we do one hell of a pressure campaign and demand the resignations, or pressure them into a situation where, they are so uncomfortable that some of them break and fall in line with what the families and the district, the administration and the teachers all want, right? And need.
Yes.
But you run a really scary gambit doing that, because if the wrong people say, I'm out of this, I don't want any more part of this, right? Then you could actually hurt your standing with whomever's going to come in after them, right? I mean, you're
That's
held
trust, right?
hostage.
Yeah. Yep.
We're literally held hostage right now.
Yeah,
And
it's because we don't trust each other at all, and
well,
even person to person. I mean, in a widespread way.
well, yes, and the vast majority of it, I would say, potentially, but no, we are looking at something that is even more of like dark money coming in, putting a slate of candidates together. Obviously, we'll fund you, but here's what your policy stances have to be. And they're not campaigning on these policy stances. This is reflective of, here is the policy.
Yep.
How do you vote, right?
Yep.
And they're voting
Yep.
stuff down, and no explanation, can't even look anybody in the eye, won't look into the cameras, nothing. But that's how they vote, right? And we're all just like, now what the hell do we do?
Well, I just read that Biden's campaign promises, he fulfilled less than 1% of them.
Oh, yeah.
That is absolutely no surprise to us.
No, to us too. We know that.
But you understand that's a lie, right? I mean, we're so desensitized to it that we don't even realize that what he did was he bold-faced lied to everybody. That's what they're all.
Did.
So what you're saying is those people on that board will say one thing. They may say completely what you want to hear. You go, oh, okay, great. I'm gonna hire on to that. I'm gonna vote for you, and they will do exactly the opposite the second they're told what to do. And the thing is, it's because they have no ramifications from you. They will from them. So
right.
they are completely allegiant, and that's what's happening in Germany right now with the Green Party. The Green Party has completely screwed the pooch over there, and has allowed this fiasco to occur, this energy fiasco to occur. And they actually,
because they were co-opted.
Yes, they were co-opted.
The finance minister there, okay, is from the Green Party now. Okay, and he is every bit a neoliberal as the earlier finance ministers were. He is.
Mm-hmm.
If you heard him,
and he
is. He was running
wise, about how they can get oil, and he's just awful.
And he sounded like a communist when he was running.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it was literally. I mean, everybody was so excited, but and he just completely just sold everything down the river, and it was also tied in with the nuclear fight, right, where everybody was, and there's still a large backlash on the left about using nuclear power, but that unfortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it. those technologies should be used. That is how we can push ourselves into a better and a greener society without using fossil fuels, without at least for a temporary amount of time. And the technology is a lot safer now than it used to be. And I'm saying this on this stream, and that's actually dangerous for me because there are a lot of people who might think that I'm co-opted now, even though it's using
And-
reality.
That we
Yeah.
the nuclear fuel interests, but
Yeah, exactly.
there are changes in the technology of
Oh.
right now. There are basically smaller plants.
Yep.
And a technology that's entirely different. But I have a question about those plants, okay, which is um, 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 has to do with vulnerability to terrorism. Do they still have a vulnerability to terrorism?
That is the issue. I mean, and that's the problem though, is if I can go to somebody and tell them that the problem is they're vulnerable if somebody goes and blows it up. That is totally different than saying that the fissile remainder it has to be stored and it's tons worth that has to be stored for the rest of our eternity. When now that fissile material is reused to the point where it's negligible at best, and I mean you're now producing like a teaspoon a year out of these new
reactors.
Nuclear reactors. So that is no longer an issue. The burning down the things like failures in them almost completely. I mean, we are still talking about nuclear being the safest form of energy. It's killed less people than any other energy source we have.
And they will not, these new reactors will not be capable of a Chernobyl or, all of the things all of the Fukushima reactors and everything that happened there. All of that.
Even through earthquakes, they do
Right.
make them to survive in earthquakes, but they cannot survive them for human destruction. That there's just no way around it. They are always going to be susceptible to a terrorist attack, but that is another level of
All the more reason to make some friends through some diplomacy.
Well, there's that too. That's the mind blowing whole thing about this, and this myth is very appropriate to that, where there was no reason for us to not be getting along at this point. That the only reason why we don't is because we desire or we demand that we stay the hegemon power of the world, that we are not going to share our power.
Is the problem.
And
let's go on to the next of the myths. Those are myths and truths about the debt of the government. In other words, the so-called national debt, or the debt that's subject to the limit. The myth is that the federal government has a deficit slash debt problem. And the truth is, the government cannot have a deficit slash debt financial problem because it is a fiat sovereign. It can have a deficit problem because it is deficit spending so much and in the wrong way on the wrong things that it creates inflation. And it also can have a deficit debt political problem, such as the one we have in the United States, because people don't understand that it cannot run out of money and believe that too much deficit spending is a danger to solvency. Okay, so what's your comment on that framing, of the matter? And I should say here that most of the myths that we're going through have a relationship to the first myth.
Yes, they do. They're absolutely
that our governments can have solvency problems. So we see, that again and again, we can dismiss some other framing of the myth because it's some derivative of the idea that we are somehow not a fiat sovereign. Okay, so we got to keep that in mind now.
I look at this as that it isn't how much you spend; it's what you spend it on.
Yep. Yes, indeed.
So you can so we can spend as much as we want, but it really matters on what we spend it on. So if we go out there and decide to spend on education, but we don't first train teachers and spend on education for those teachers, we're going to cause an inflation on those teachers' salaries. We're going to cause there's all these different, which might be a good thing. I'm just saying though that if you don't spend on the resources to build up in order for the macro level initiative, you can cause inflation that way. Like oil, if we don't have enough energy production in the United States, every industry is going to, as we saw, have inflation. Whether that's really a resource restriction or something that say you can't afford. They make plenty of TVs, but I can't afford the price point they're at anymore. Well, that's an artificial resource restriction, and so you're no longer able to afford that. It's only going to a certain type of or class of person, so that the production will go down, and that will cause unemployment.
Okay, to see whether you're going to have an inflation problem, you have to do more than look at the macro picture.
That's what I mean. Sorry.
Yes, exactly.
You have to do is you
Exactly.
have to look at the particular areas in which the economy is broken down, and then see whether you're spending too much in one or more, okay, of these areas. Like, for example, Fadl Kaboub points out that there are 4 or 5 main areas where inflation is a problem, okay, in our economy. So he specifically speaks of those areas as causing the macro problem, okay, of inflation. Well, there are many more areas, okay, of the economy that he doesn't mention, because in those areas, the resources are consistent with the amount of money being spent in those areas. So it's the question of the relationship of the amount of money being spent in an area to the resources in that area. And if you really
money itself, but monetary creation itself is not a cause of inflation. It's only a symptom of inflation.
Well, I don't know if I would put it, okay, in that way. Too much money being spent in a particular area but can be a cause of inflation, but it's like...
It's going to create a resource restriction that causes the inflation.
It's both a resource restriction and also the money being spent. It's like there are necessary conditions and there are sufficient conditions, and there are perhaps a bunch of jointly necessary conditions that will then combine to create a sufficient condition to cause inflation in that particular area.
But there's still always a resource restriction first.
Yes.
So you may not know it's there, but when you start spending,
you find out it's there. In other words, when you start spending in a particular area, you may find out, for example, that there are not enough nurses to handle the spending in that particular area.
So when inflation, say nurses' salaries start to go up, that's actually a sign for us to do something about training more nurses.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying it's a symptom. It's a sign of inflation. It isn't a cause of inflation. That's always a resource restriction.
Unless it's housing, then everybody...
If there's not enough houses available in your price range, that's a artificial resource restriction to me. I mean, and this is the way I view it. So, that's
it's right, but it's a double-edged sword when it is, it depends on which side of this equation and whose bread's buttered on it, right? I mean, if you've got a housing market, right? You got a housing market where every new development that goes up around you, and every 2 years your house is pinging at another $35,000-$40,000 worth, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that is inflation. But for the people living in the neighborhood, they're like, go! This is awesome! Woohoo!
Right? Go inflation. If I sell now, I can retire for the rest
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah,
And
nobody said inflation was a bad thing all the time. Actually, it is just giving money to a different sector.
correct. But I
It-
mean, let's just be really honest here. We never fixed what brought the housing markets to its knees in 2007 and 2008. Never fixed it.
Never
Okay.
no,
fixed it because the people who
this
made all
wasn't
the money
broken to
during
them.
that period didn't want it fixed.
Exactly.
They
It
wanted
wasn't broken to them.
It wasn't
Okay.
broken to them. They were doing. That's what it was supposed to do. It's just that
Mhm.
once it happened and it hurt a lot of people, they had to say, "Oh, I'm sorry." That's the reason why nobody went to jail, because it wasn't illegal.
Right.
They
Well,
made up these laws
yeah,
later to
yeah,
say,
it
"Oh, that
was.
was illegal," and then they never
Nobody abided by
really
them.
want that. Yeah,
I mean,
that
no,
was
nobody's
the entire result.
enforcing anything. There's no enforcement of anything right now. It is
Well,
so. What is resource constraint right now? Let's flip this. Let's flip
yes,
this script for a minute. What is resource constraint right now are the
yep,
agencies in the federal government that are responsible for being the watchdogs with regulatory.
There
Okay,
we have a terrific amount of resource constraint.
yep. There's a
huge
lot of
resource
constraint.
constraint.
And we have had
Huge.
that for years because the private
Mhm.
interests want the resource constraint. Like, for example, at the IRS, they've been cutting
Mm-hmm.
personnel for years and years and years because they don't want to pay taxes.
Yep.
So,
And then
And
I think the solution is to go after the middle class for that.
oh, hey, no, don't go to the middle class. Go to the
That's what they're
top.
doing.
Go
No,
to
but
the
that's what they're doing.
top. Yes, I know.
You don't hire
I know that.
78,000 people and go after two or 300 people at the top.
They are literally going into $600 transactions. Okay, they're not going into the middle class. They're going into any bastard who made a $600 transaction. Okay,
Yep.
welcome to reality. This is all just smoke and mirrors and horse crap. And maybe it has to do with, how the monetary system is going to have to change. And they're going to just go play this game. I don't know, honestly. But there's all kinds of things that, gee, if they're doing this, then are they doing this? And are they doing
As
that?
long,
And who in the world's great powers really is our friend and really is our enemy? That's my most common thread that goes through my head right now. Because
well,
the truth of the matter is that no matter who you are, if you are in a sovereign that has resources and who has, on the uptick of infrastructure and economic growth, it's good, right? And the U.S. wants to hang on to this hegemony, but let's just be real here. You have to create situations in order to, placate spending. The U.S., it is not uncommon for when the U.S. things get a little weird, we go to war. Why? Because it fishes you out of other problems within your economy. It makes things worse, sure it does, but it also makes certain things better.
it's a class
So
war.
it is a
That's
class
why
war.
it is always a class war. It has always been a
Mhm.
class war, and that's the part, because the class has been feeding us for centuries that their way of life is seems more important, seems better, even though the majority of us would not really feel any better or any happier in that way or lifestyle. We really do just want to be able to live our lives, and most of us want to live pretty simply.
We
Um,
just want to be able to be happy and watch our kids have a decent life, right?
yeah, and that's exactly the point is. So when we are pretty much a subservient people, where we just really want to get along and have a set list of things to do that we know we can be successful at, that we know our children can have a decent life, that they're going to have a future, all these different things, it leaves us susceptible to those who do not view those that way. They view things in sustaining their way of life.
Right.
And in order to sustain their way of life, they have to exploit. Because there's no way a billionaire or even a multi millionaire can ever have that amount of money and sustain it without exploitation of some point or somebody in the system. And that is reflected in our government. It is a class war. It is, especially in a capitalist society, it's a class war first, because they need to maintain their lifestyle. And if you're in their way of maintaining it, if somebody's in my way of maintaining my family's lifestyle, I would, and I had the wherewithal to be in front of that and stop it, I certainly would. That's why I advocate for this macroeconomic changes, because it changes it from the systemic level. That I don't view anything that is happening right now as separate from a systemic problem. It is
absolutely.
Because the coercion is based on that exploitation.
Yes, 100%. And there was one other piece of this that I wanted to pick up before we walked off of it, but I'm really tired.
I'm sorry, I screwed you up.
No, it's okay.
And I apologize, because I'm gonna have to go make dinner.
I know. Oh, I know what it was. It's this whole deficit thing, on getting out of current situation, and let's just go brass tacks, right? A government's deficit is an asset in the private sector, right?
Yeah, of course.
That's how it works. But we always call it a deficit. Well, and this is the scare tactic, right? Oh, our government is in so much debt. How are we going to pay it back? Folks, our government has provided us with assets. What do we care? Yeah, they can pay them back.
And also, not only that, but the government pays back each year something like $60 trillion of debt, which sounds funny to people because people say, we only owe about $29 trillion. I'm not sure, by the way, the figure is 60 trillion. I have to look it up in the daily treasury statement each day. Now is a good time, to look it up. If you look it up as of September 30th, which is coming shortly, you will probably find that the government has repaid something like $60 to $70 trillion of debt this year. Even though the level of the government debt has been something like 29 or $30 trillion. So how can it pay off? Now, where is it getting the wherewithal to pay off $70 trillion worth of debt? Well, the point is the debt is always circulating.
It's circulating, yes.
Always
debt comes due, we issue new, la 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 la. It's the circle of life.
And that's why the total debt that we pay back each year is many times the total debt that we're supposed to have as a constant factor.
Well, the deficit, though, that is used as such a club.
I know.
Japan went from, a devastated country in 1945 to a thriving, technologically innovated, just amazing economy, right? And they run their deficits like crazy, and they pay them off, and they run them, and they pay them off.
Yeah, right.
What happens?
They're running a debt to GDP ratio of something like 250 to 260%.
It's 242 today.
242 today. Okay, 242%. Whereas our debt to GDP ratio is something.
They're a sovereign. Yeah. They are a sovereign with a fiat currency, right?
Fiat sovereign currency, right?
Yep. So and they prove that inflation, that spending doesn't cause inflation, and that's the biggest thing.
Because they've kept inflation very low as well.
They can't make inflation. They've been trying to for a long time. They even did what we say we can't do and paid off their entire debt twice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about the debt as Japanese bonds, like Japanese bank bonds. I mean, the actual like our Federal Reserve bonds that we have, $60 trillion. They just went and wiped it clean,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't cause any inflation. It
No,
actually caused a deflation, which is something that we can is really intricate to talk about.
I'd love to have that
But
discussion, but we don't have to have it here.
uh,
Anyway,
I gotta get going too. I really appreciate you guys having me on. I'm sorry I leave in the middle of these things, but I gotta go make dinner.
hey, it's all right.
Matt,
I
you
totally
did
get it, and it was
tonight.
so good to have it.
Very much
Oh,
appreciate
thank you guys. I appreciate
uh,
it.
See ya. See you
also,
soon.
by the way,
Yeah.
I think this discussion has been a wonderful one from an MMT point of view,
Good.
and I think we should go on with it 1 week from now.
Okay. Well,
All right.
I can't 1 week. I can do it the week after. I can't do it the next week, but I can do it the week after.
Okay, that'll be fine. Then we'll do it the week after.
We'll have some
That's
fun
good.
with
Thank
that.
you guys.
Good night. Have
All
a
right.
good dinner.
Take care.
Yeah. So, it just reminded me of something. We're worried about this recession, worried about it. I don't know. Some people don't even think it's here. Others know it's going to be really, really bad. La, 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 lagging indicators. Everything's spin right now. Hallelujah. Maybe it'll last until after the November elections, whatever. But we are running surpluses, which is also a problem for causing recession, on top of raising interest rates, which doesn't seem to have any end in sight. At first, they were concerned about how much unemployment that would cause, but now it doesn't seem like they care. I'm really, really worried about the we can even start speculating on the D word. I'm going out a ways, but things are going to get really, really bad really quick.
They could get very, very bad, but there's still the concern on Biden's part over 2024.
Oh,
So
for heaven's
he
sake.
is going to have an incentive to pump up the spending to avoid 2024. Now, in this respect, he's working against the Fed, of course, which is trying to restrict the flow of money. But it remains to be seen who's going to win in that particular context. Uh,
Well,
could,
if Biden wants to hit some deflationary numbers, man, just pull the switch on Medicare for all. I mean, let's do that.
yep, if he pulls a switch on Medicare for all, that will be deflationary.
You know what else it'll do? I mean, come on, like maybe we could even make the Fed happy at the same time, and we'll have this transitional point of unemployment while everybody gets their just transition. Hey, what do you know? We can fix PAL too.
Yep, absolutely terrific. Let us but go into the comments. Okay, at this point, I think we have a number of interesting ones. I'm going to mark off where we ended.
Hey, Joe, I'm going to go off camera, but I will be on my microphone. I have to take care of a couple things, but I'll be right back. But I'll talk. You just won't see me.
Okay, great. That'll be fine.
Oh, look, you get to see my face anyway.
Thank you, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, folks, we're about to take on your comments. I'm going to get this out of the screen. Oh, there's Bonnie in the background. You can see. Okay, I'm going back to the beginning here. Well, the convo catch was here for a little while. I guess that was probably pasta, right? Let me guess. Inflation. No, not just inflation, folks. Steve says, hello, Doc, Lisa, and comrades. Steve says, hello, Pasta. Smash the like button. Steve says, subscribe. And Pasta says, hello, going to sleep. Good night, everyone. Yeah, I can understand why Pasta has to go to sleep early because I think he's got to be up fairly early to get with Fee these days. Sandy says, hello, shared. Steve says, conservative talk radio show I listened to was laughing at AOC for talking about minting the coin like she was a child. Apparently, she has a clue. Yep, I'm sure she's talked to Rowan every once in a while. I think she not only has a clue, I think she understands there is such a thing as minting the platinum coin and putting very high face values on it. And of course, it'll become relevant soon to talk about that because they're starting to talk about uh, having a debt ceiling crisis again. So that's about to come around. And so that brings with it talk of the platinum coin. And Teresa says, shared, we have accepted third world problems in the richest first world nation in history. Insane. It is insane. Kay says, Fed will lead us into a recession soon. Stocks went to hell today. Jeff Denton says, don't worry, whoever they are, they will shut down the government and to pretend to fight with their fellow conspirators about a deficit they could square up just as easily as they create money for war. Yes, Jeffrey, that's right. And Steve says plenty of money for war. And Kay says nothing will change until the Fed admits MMT. Either that or maybe somebody could get the Fed chair to resign. Steve says they use the Weimar Republic in Germany to scare people. Steve says, sorry. Yeah, I know they do use the Weimar Republic, but that's bullshit. It's just not like our situation. Dolores says, great to see everyone. But it does illustrate certain principles, okay, of MMT, of what happens when you're not a monetary sovereign, don't have control over your currency, what that can mean. Steve Wolfbrand says, are Russian sanctions vacuum? Hit that like button. Don't be shy. Steve Wolfbrand said, backfired. Sorry, stupid. Autocorrect. Sandy says, Mark Cuban is selling pharmaceuticals at 15% over the cost price to make them affordable. Usually they are sold 100% above cost. I thought they were sold a lot more than that, Sandy.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical pricing. I worked in the industry. We had a pharmacy. If you want to get into a quagmire and like spend 3 years trying to figure out how pricing works, pharmaceuticals are their own market within their own region, sometimes within their own pharmacy. It is heinous what we do.
Yeah, right. The pricing is arbitrary, basically. It depends on what they think they can get away with.
Depends on what they've got in stock, and they reduce stock on purpose. It's disgusting. Oh, and Bernie told Joe Manchin that he'll shut down the government if Joe doesn't play ball. So
Well,
we're starting to play dirty.
See Bernie do that because that's the only way you're going to win anything from those guys. You got to play.
Yeah, you got to play hardball.
You got to play hardball all the time, all the time. Teresa says we're looking at one cultural lens as far as governance. I suggest reading David Graeber and David Wenfro's book, The Dawn of Everything. They examine indigenous societies globally. Eye-opener. Thank you, Teresa.
If he shuts down the government, Manchin's cronies don't get their checks.
Yeah, these cronies won't get their checks, but depending on how they shut down the government, we Social Security recipients may not get our checks either.
I don't think they'll do that. That would be extreme. They've only done that. I don't even know if they did that back at the last time.
I don't think they did that back the last time. In other words, they some of the government contractors did not get checks,
but they got their money retro. when they open back up.
They got their money retro, but well,
Hey, it's not pretty no matter how you slice it. However,
it caused some of them financial difficulties. Some of the people financial difficulties they would not otherwise have
have
had because
had.
some people don't have enough money to tide themselves over.
Yes, but they don't care who doesn't get a job right now, Joe. That's what this interest rate hikes is intended to do. Put people out of work. So, you know, it's one of those things where this is what we've come to. We are expendable in a policy sense right now. And we don't have the mechanism. They won't even abolish the filibuster to do things that have to be done.
I know, I know.
And they've got everybody convinced that it's impossible for them to abolish the filibuster. Bull, bull. That's crap. And if you bought into that, I'm telling you, you bought into a lie.
Right, and I have never thought that that is impossible to do. I have
Mm-mm.
always talked about how you do it
Mhm.
and the mechanics, okay, of how you do it, how those motions have to be made, how they have to be handled. It's easy to do the nuclear option, but it takes will. It takes
Right.
people who are willing to go to the mat for it. And
Like shut down the government or abolish the filibuster mansion. You choose. No
yeah,
money's going to your cronies. I don't, it's not going to happen because we're going to shut this baby down. Or give me your vote on abolishing the filibuster or on a carve out on three. I mean, you play hardball.
yes,
Because I'm telling you what, if we don't start playing hardball, all we're going to continue to do is get strangled because it's very obvious that the public purpose is not on their minds.
and the first thing you pay hardball about, okay, is abortion rights.
Sure,
That's got to
abortion rights, and let's go with
be
healthcare
the first thing because people are dying now.
and healthcare. People have
And
been
health,
dying.
because people are dying there also.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm reading this. Daily Cost says Republicans show their hand. National abortion ban introduced.
yeah, I know. That's something that Lindsey Graham did today. Uh,
Isn't that interesting? Lindsay, of all people.
yeah, Lindsay the snake, Lindsay the worm. Yeah, Lindsay the really disgusting piece of crap. Okay. Steve Wilpran says, Doc, I told you weeks ago the Russian army are clowns. I don't have a dog in this fight. Maybe there's Nazis in the Ukrainian forces, but the Russians are running. Okay, Steve, I got a couple of things to say about that. First thing is, I don't know if there are many more Nazis, okay, in the Ukrainian forces because there were an awful lot of them that have been killed already, okay, in this war. Secondly, the Russian army are not clowns. The Russian army has not been in Ukraine in force. It isn't the Russian army. They have 200,000 people over there, yes. They have a lot of paid mercenaries over there.
Proxy war for the most
Uh,
part.
they have Chechens that are fighting over there. They have some Russian army people who are kind of supervising the whole thing, and there are militia from
Hmm.
Donbass, okay, and Luhansk,
Who've been
all,
there forever.
right, and altogether they have about 200,000 people, and Ukraine has about 700,000 people, and they still haven't been able to beat them in the Donbass. And the Russians are still winning. They had victories today, okay, in Bakhmut, in the southeast. They are still having victories. Uh, the explanation for the victory in Kharkov is because the Russians have been moving limited supply of manpower to the south for weeks. And in the end, when the Ukrainians attacked close to Kharkov, they attacked with 15,000 troops, and the Russians were down to at most 2,000 troops and may have had as few as 700 troops stationed there this time. Now, since then, they've reinforced it to stabilize the line they have now. But that victory for Ukraine was produced with a tremendous manpower, uh, with a tremendous advantage of manpower over the Russians in that local situation. And the Russians didn't want to lose the people they had there. That is why they retreated and they left their stuff. But they haven't given up their offensive in the south yet, and the Ukrainians have not made a dent in what they're doing in the south. Okay, now, because of the political effects of this victory that they've had there, uh,
For one day, and the whole news cycle flips on a dime. It's actually pathetic.
yes, it's actually pathetic, but this is having a political effect in Russia, and there is much pressure on Putin to change the nature of the conflict from a
Right.
special military uh, uh, operation to an anti-terrorist operation.
Which,
And
yeah.
that has a legal meaning for the Russians. Specifically, it means that they will be free to introduce a much larger number of troops into the situation, as well as different methods of attack, strategy, tactics, far more tanks, okay, and missiles. In other words, if they redefine what this war is called, they will have a legal basis for a much expanded operation. And then I'd be interested to see how the Ukrainians are going to do then. I don't think they're going to do very well at all. And by the way, they haven't done very well at all. They've had a tremendous amount of casualties there,
You know,
far more than the Russians have had.
this is just awful. This whole thing. There is no good reason to maintain, you know, closing down diplomatic channels. There's no good reason for this other than they want to continue the war. And when
Yes,
I say they,
we,
I'm talking about us.
yeah,
And
our foreign
it's
policy
bad.
establishment wants to continue the war because they're after the collapse of the Russian Federation. That's what they're after.
I think they're just after a make our way through the election cycle right now.
Well, I think the end goal is to maintain um, uh, a unipolar system. And
Yeah, but I don't even know how they're going to accomplish that in this war. From
uh,
everything that we've seen, I don't know how they're going to accomplish that. As a matter of fact, the longer we leave these sanctions on, the worse it's going to be for Europe.
it's going to, right. And Europe is part of our hegemonic order. So
Yes.
we're eating up a part of our hegemonic order in order to break down Russia. By the way, we're not going to succeed in breaking down Russia. There is no way because their economy is too strong. But the way we were seeking to maintain the world, okay, that we built was to break down Russia and thus weaken China, and then later go after China. That was
And
our
that
plan.
doesn't even make any sense because their economies and their resources are too large.
Too large, and especially with the Russian and Chinese together,
Hmm.
they have everything they need to resist us completely. We're not going to win that. We have to change our strategy and we have to adapt to a multipolar world. And when I say that, I know that in many ways a multipolar world is more dangerous. It gets us back to a 19th century situation. In that 19th century, you had small wars breaking out quite a few times over that supposedly peaceful period from 1815 to 1914. And of course, in the last years of that period, from 1890 on up, there were continual crises and attempts to stave off what became the First World War. And that was not successfully done because we were living in a multipolar world at that time, but one that was far less dangerous than the multipolar world we would have at this point. So it's not enough to simply have a multipolar world. We have to adapt to it in the right way. We have to be collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Yes, we
to
do.
try to accommodate the aspirations of other nations, okay, and other people. We have to be really peace loving.
Well, or we have to at least understand that if we all are going to be able to function with the interdependencies of every economy on every other country now, okay, then you have to have diplomacy. The problem is, how much damage have we done in the last year because we've not honored agreements and treaties? We've gone against and poked the bear, literally, put ourselves in situations, and it's the regime that put, because they do not serve the public purpose, because they do not serve the general welfare of the citizenry anymore. They don't. Okay? They do not. Half of Europe is going to freeze this winter, and nobody cares.
And if half of Europe freezes, then much of Europe is also going to die. And that is
Well,
and that
and
is
the,
to create chaos in Europe.
well, yeah. And how do you start wars when people are desperate? Right? That's what happens. It's not rocket science here. When people can no longer heat, eat, live, you're going to have unrest. You're going to set us all up for the same types of things that have happened, that have started world wars, awful conflict,
Yes.
people dying unnecessarily. And I'll tell you something else. There's going to be promises made that we're going to get energy over there, and we don't have the infrastructure to do it. It ain't coming in 3 months.
Yep.
We've got some serious problems, and I know that in this country it is a really dirty word to say that we need to use diplomacy. How in God's name have we gotten the public to an opinion where diplomacy is bad?
I know the answer to that question because
Oh,
it's due to maybe 22 years of not doing any diplomacy, but always using a military solution or an attempted military solution.
yeah, sure. And we don't even have any say in whether or not our government goes to war anymore. They've totally taken that off the table for us.
Yeah, right. Because they've undermined the authority of Congress to control that. And Congress has allowed them to undermine that. They can take that authority back any time because they have the power of the purse. But it's the same kind of thing as with shutting down the government to
Mm-hmm.
overcome the people who are trying to do some evil things and who are threatening to shut down the government themselves. If you want to take the authority back, you have to call the bluff of those who are claiming that authority but do not have legitimate authority according to the Constitution. If you want to stop the executive branch from going to war right and left, you have to take back the Congress to declare war, and you have to insist that if there are any wars that are instituted by the executive branch, they're going to be shut down by the power of the purse immediately.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Yes.
way you have to play it. You have to say, according to the Constitution, this is Congress's role, You get out of it.
But you know
tell
what, though,
us.
Joe? You've got the same old problem, right? It's not representation of the constituents. It is representation of the
Of the
donors.
voters. Yes, that's right. And that's why we have dumped the incumbents as a show.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do.
And Lana says, "Good night, Matt." Ghostart says, "What did Ghostart say?" He had something really cool about democracy. He said, "Breaking. The royal family has confirmed democracy has been suspended indefinitely as a tribute to the Queen." Good one, Ghostart. Good one.
Wait. I gotta read that. I gotta go back and read that. I
Okay,
missed
go
it.
ahead. Breaking. The royal family has confirmed democracy has been suspended indefinitely as a tribute to the Queen. How's that? That's pretty good, huh?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
The FBI caught up with Mike Pillow Guy Lindell at a Hardee's and seized his phone. Oh, you mean they still left him with the hamburger?
I don't understand. What is he on
uh,
the lam or something? Why? What do you mean they caught up with him at a Hardee's? I don't get it.
well, they chased him down, and he was at a Hardee's,
Restaurant.
and they had a court order to seize his phone.
Oh, it was just for his phone. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, but I guess it didn't encompass his hamburger, so he got to continue to eat his hamburger. So Kay says, "Hi, Bonnie," laugh out loud. And Kay says, "Hi, Steve." Steve says, "You might want to invite AOC on your show." Uh, I'd love to invite AOC onto my show, but I don't know, with our small audience, I don't know why she would come. Or maybe I could invite her to talk about minting the coin. I mean, maybe she'd like to do that.
You can try. You can always ask. Not much else you can do.
I'm sorry, say that again.
We can always ask.
We can always ask, yes.
Yes.
So let's do that and see if she wants to talk about actually minting the coin. Jeff Denton says, "I think I might have kind of scared off the controlled opposition guys who attacked state-based healthcare reform."
Ooh, what do you do?
Oh, really, Jeff? How'd you do that? Who were those guys? And Ghostot says, "Hey, Ed K. Ryan." Kay says, "Bernie was in the Senate floor today for Medicare for All."
Yes, he was.
Says, uh, "AOC would be a great guest, Steve." Yeah, she certainly would be. Jeff says, "I saw that and watched Bernie today. It was weird, like they were shadow banning most people. There are only 400 people in the chat, and there's usually 10 or 20 trolls, and there weren't." So, Ghostot says, "Today, Kabbalah said," I think it's actually Kamala, right?
Oh, is she still around? I haven't heard from her in months. But go ahead.
Said, "If you VBNMW, vote blue no matter who, in the midterms, all of your dreams will come true." Okay, so maybe Kabbalah is appropriate there.
Maybe
It's the magic of Kabbalah.
it's good. I mean, at least people are laughing now.
At least so. And Ghostat says, Donbass is the Russian priority, RN. Of course, Donbass is. That's why they went in there, to take care of the Russians.
Hey, Lana's asking a question here, and I just want Lana to understand. No, Lana, I have not. My last 3 days of my life has been very packed, but I was planning on doing that very soon, connecting with John Roberts Berkeley.
Okay, the U.S. objective was to put a wedge, by the way, Russia and Germany pipeline. Oh, I see. Yes, I'm sure that was an important U.S. objective, but that was by way also of weakening Russia. And Kay says, "Jeffrey, people are sick and tired of the sick care system. I know I am. We are all sick and tired of it. We're going to have to invade U.S. to bring democracy here.
Say it again.
And Kay says, yes, Steve. And Lana says, the hamburger, the hamburger, the hamburglar,
Hamburglar. There you go.
the hamburglar. Yeah, the hamburglar at Hardee's. And Lana says, okay, that Andre can ask. I don't believe Andre would ask for us on that. But I think we could ask her and point out that we're friends of Andres. Yes. And Lana says, also, did either of you connect with John Roberts Brakey? No, I haven't connected with him. I've been very busy the last but 2 or 3 days, okay, as well, Lana. So I'm sorry to say I haven't gotten in touch with him yet. I will do so as soon as I have a breathing space. I was busy most of the day with doing something for Bonnie, and so no, I haven't had time to get a hold of him. And Ghostla says the pillow guy only eats hamburgers, Joe. Hamburgers. Jeff says, like it was a freaking democracy to begin with. That's true. Lana says, okay, thanks. Okay, I think
We've done it, and I stuck around much longer than I thought I was going to, but I am really, really glad that we did this. I think this was a good one.
Yes, I think it was a very good one too. And I'm looking forward to other good ones based on this because there are an awful lot more myths to go through.
Oh, so many.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And we will see you tomorrow.
Okay, and Lisa, tomorrow we'll be talking more about the road to fascism. Okay, and Madeline will be with us once again.
Oh, good.
So I'm sure we will have a wonderful discussion tomorrow. I've actually posted the show on Twitter, okay, already.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure people have started to tweet it out. And so Ghostart says, good vibes. Kay says, well, I'm out of here tonight. Love you all. We love you, Kay. And Dolores says, thank you. Thank you very much, Dolores. And Lana says, good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
And thank you, Lana.
Thank you, Joe.
And thank you, Lisa. Good night.